In the spring of 1453, a 21-year-old man stood outside the walls of Constantinople, watching a city that had survived 1,000 years of sieges finally begin to fall. History would remember him as the Conqueror, but that title tells you almost nothing about who he actually was. Behind the famous conquest was a man who read Greek philosophy for pleasure, kept scholars close to his court, and was as curious about the world as he was determined to rule it. This is the story of that man. Mehmed was born in 1432 in the city of Edirne, one of several sons of Sultan Mehmed II. He wasn't the obvious heir. As a child, he was reportedly stubborn and difficult to teach, and his early tutors struggled to control him. But everything changed when his father brought in a scholar named Molla Gurani, a strict and highly respected teacher. According to Ottoman tradition, Gurani finally got the young prince's attention using firm discipline, and from that point on, Mehmed threw himself into learning. And he didn't stop at basic lessons. By the time he reached adulthood, Mehmed reportedly could read and speak several languages, including Turkish, Arabic, Persian, and Greek, and he had some knowledge of Latin and Slavic languages as well. Historians still debate exactly how fluent he was in each one, but there's little doubt he had a genuine hunger for language and ideas. He studied mathematics, history, and Islamic law. He read about the campaigns of Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar. This wasn't just royal formality. Mehmed seemed to actually enjoy learning in a way that stayed with him for the rest of his life. He became sultan for the first time at just 12 years old, when his father briefly stepped down from the throne. It didn't go well. The empire's officials and military weren't ready to follow a child, and Murad had to return to power. But this early failure taught Mehmed something important. Knowledge and ambition weren't enough on their own. He needed patience, strategy, and the trust of the people around him. When his father died in 1451, Mehmed became sultan again, this time for good. He was 19 years old, and he already had one goal fixed in his mind: Constantinople. The city had fascinated Ottoman rulers for generations. It sat at the meeting point of Europe and Asia, controlling trade between the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. Taking it wasn't just about military glory. It meant securing the empire's borders, gaining one of the greatest cities in the world, and stepping into a legacy that stretched back to the Roman Empire itself. Mehmed studied the city's defenses carefully. He commissioned a massive cannon capable of breaking through walls that had stood for centuries. He built a fortress on the Bosphorus to cut off supply routes. This was not a reckless young man rushing into war. It was a calculated, almost obsessive plan, years in the making. The siege lasted about 7 weeks. On May 29, 1453, Ottoman forces broke through, and Constantinople fell. Like most conquests of that era, the fighting was brutal, and the city endured the violence typical of a medieval siege, including looting and casualties among its defenders and residents. This was standard practice in warfare at the time, not unique to Mehmed, but it's an honest part of the story and shouldn't be erased. What happened next is where Mehmed's character really starts to show. He didn't destroy the city. He renamed it Istanbul and made it his new capital, and almost immediately began working to rebuild it. He was more interested in what the city could become than in what he could take from it. One of the most important decisions he made concerned the Christian population. The Byzantine Empire had just ended, but Mehmed didn't try to erase Christianity from the city. Instead, he allowed the Orthodox Church to continue operating and appointed a new patriarch, Gennadius Scholarius, giving him authority over the Christian community. This system, where religious communities managed their own internal affairs under Ottoman rule, became known as the millet system. It wasn't full equality by modern standards, and non-Muslims paid a special tax and had a different legal status. But compared to much of Europe at the time, where religious minorities often faced expulsion or forced conversion, it offered a real and unusual degree of protection and continuity. Mehmed also brought Jewish communities into the city, inviting Jewish refugees fleeing persecution elsewhere in Europe to settle in Istanbul. Historians see this as part of a broader strategy. A diverse, populated capital was a stronger and wealthier one. But it also reflects something about how Mehmed personally viewed different peoples and religions. He didn't see them purely as obstacles or subjects to be controlled. He saw them as valuable. That attitude carried into his court. Mehmed employed Christian administrators and kept Greek scholars close to him. He was known to have Italian painters visit his palace, and the most famous example is the Venetian artist Gentile Bellini, who painted a portrait of the Sultan later in his reign. Mehmed reportedly enjoyed conversations with scholars from different backgrounds, discussing philosophy, geography, and science. Some later Ottoman stories describe him personally debating Christian theologians and scientists at court. Historians are cautious about how literally to take some of these accounts, since many were written after his death and shaped to build his legend. But even setting aside the exaggerated stories, the pattern is clear from more reliable evidence. Mehmed genuinely valued knowledge, regardless of where it came from.
He collected manuscripts in Greek and Latin. He had ancient Greek texts translated and studied. He was interested in geography and reportedly owned maps and globes, curious about lands far beyond his own empire. This wasn't typical behavior for a 15th century monarch obsessed only with religious or military power. Mehmed seemed to genuinely believe that ruling well meant understanding the wider world, not just conquering it. After Constantinople, his ambitions didn't slow down. He expanded Ottoman territory into the Balkans, parts of Anatolia, and along the Black Sea coast, and he even launched a brief campaign into southern Italy near the end of his life, a sign that his ambitions may have reached toward Rome itself. He rebuilt Istanbul's infrastructure, constructed the Topkapi Palace, and turned the city into a genuine center of trade, learning, and administration. In 1481, while leading yet another military campaign, Mehmed died. He was only 49 years old. The exact cause is debated by historians, with illness being the most likely explanation, though some later accounts suggest poisoning. No conclusive evidence settles the question either way. What he left behind was an empire transformed. Constantinople, once the heart of a fading Byzantine world, became the thriving capital of a rising Ottoman one. Mehmed is remembered as a brilliant military strategist, but the fuller picture is more interesting than that. He was a ruler shaped by discipline and curiosity, someone who valued scholars as much as soldiers, and who built a capital based on coexistence between different religions and cultures, however imperfect that coexistence was by modern standards. He wasn't a flawless humanitarian, and he wasn't a simple conqueror either. He was a complicated man who wanted power, but who also genuinely wanted to understand the world he was conquering. That combination is probably the real reason his name is still remembered more than 500 years later.